everybody. It's Monday, April 19th, and that means it's time for another episode of Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia, Nonprofit Conversations. I'm one of your hosts, Cecilia Supp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips Nonprofit Consulting and Association Management Services. And I'm here today with my co-host and friend, Agnes. I'm going to throw it over to Agnes to say hello.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience. My name is Agnes Amos-Coleman. I'm an author and a consultant. Over to you, Cecilia, and thank you.
Thanks, Agnes. And what we want to start out today's episode with is Agnes is home, as in home in Florida in the United States. And we're so pleased for her and her family. And we just want to thank everyone for all your support as Agnes has gone through more than a challenging year. So welcome home, Agnes, and we're so glad you're back.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and to our global audience who have really supported us in our journey of challenging times. We really appreciate you. We're definitely home. We're very excited to be home, and we just want to thank you so much for all you did for us.
And yes, we're so glad you're back. It's been great. And you got so much support from around the world, and it's a great story for the COVID era. And also your recent experiences over the last year, working to get home, culminated in airline travel. And so that's what leads us to today's topic, airline travel in the COVID era. Because as we all know, airline travel can be stressful and it can be challenging. So Agnes has had an experience flying home that has a lot of pain points for all of us and that we can take lessons from. So I'm going to hand it over to Agnes and let her outline some of the things that happened to her on her flight, on her way home, and how we can maybe learn from these and be better at what we do. So Agnes.
Thank you, Cecilia. And yes, indeed. And before I started, just to give an overview of what my experiences felt like with the airline that I traveled with, and it is British Airways. I have to commend that British Airways is one of the greatest airline that I've had the privilege of flying with over the years. But during our experience of returning home at the end of the year, at the end of March, it was actually a very trying times for us. Particularly at the international airport in Abuja, Nigeria. And that's why I'm mentioning this because, as you know, British Airways has different stations all over the world, but our experience happened in Abuja. And what really happened with us, with our situation was, it was a normal day, a normal morning. We got to the airport at 5 a.m. in the morning. We were supposed to board the plane that was leaving at 9 o'clock to London, and we were going to change over in London to the US. After we boarded the plane, we were kept on the flight for about 3 hours, and then we found out that there was technical problems. I totally get it. I think that if there's technical problems, safety first. So if there's an issue, I'm for airlines fixing the issue before we proceed. So no problems with that. But where I found the issue was after we got off the airplane, they told us that we were going to get off because they couldn't fix the technical problem and it was safety first. They were going to they told us to all go to the waiting area and that they were going to provide us with some refreshments. We never heard anything from them. We were in the waiting area till about 5 o'clock. They provided crackers and a bottle of water, and there was no communication. About 5 o'clock in the evening, there was confusion when we heard over one of the staff at British Airways informed the audience, informed the passengers that we were not going anywhere for the day, and that we were all going to go to the hotel, spend the night there, and then we would come back in the next morning to move on to our destination. One of the greatest challenges that I have was in their communication strategy. The communication was so disjointed. We spoke to 10 different people and we had 10 different answers. And the left didn't know what the right was doing. And then when they eventually got us on the bus, we were all sandwiched together like a piece of meat, and it was just awful. I mean, the experience was just terrible, terrible experience.
Oh my
And
God.
I'm saying this because I really think that British Airways really need to really look at that station, or really look at how they can mitigate this kind of risk in the future, on how they can manage COVID travel, because COVID travel is here to stay. And what they don't want is a situation that will continue to damage their brand. And I've also heard of other airlines that are going through some challenging times as well in managing communication. So I really think that this is so important, particularly for our association community, as they do a lot of traveling, to really plan this into their schedule and work with airlines to get more information before they leave, and encourage airlines to share more information with them before they begin their travel experience, Cecilia.
Well, I'm glad you finally made it home, but that is such an uncomfortable thing to go through, I should say. And you were traveling with your little boy, so you were also worried about his comfort as well. So when we're traveling in a group or traveling alone, so to kind of frame this for our audience, though, let's look at this. What you just went through, you had a canceled event, you needed to have an adjustment to how you were going to get to the rescheduled event, which is the next flight. There was the movement of people that needed to be handled. There was the distribution of refreshments. There was the communication. And so when we look at all of those steps in your story and your personal experience, these are all things that we have to do and do well.
And in fact, Cecilia, to that point, one of the things that, I don't know if you know this, before you can travel internationally, you have to do a COVID test. So for attendees who are going to events who do COVID tests, the test is only valid it's only valid for about 72 to 92 hours. And I think in the US, depending on the country that you're going to, if your COVID test that you did, it's no longer valid because that travel schedule was canceled, then wherever you go, you're going to have to get stuck in that station and get to do another COVID test. So there's a disruption in travel. There's a disruption in your events. It could be your speaker that wants to come and speak. They wouldn't be able to get there on time. So we really have to factor that into play when we're working with airlines on moving people from event to event so that they can get there in time, on time for the event, and do the business that they're there to do.
That's a really good point, Agnes. That is a detail I think some of us are forgetting to factor in. Is if you want to be in person or travel, you've got to have that COVID-19 test, or I guess maybe have the card showing you've been vaccinated.
That's correct.
I know there's been some talk, people throw out this idea of like COVID passports, but I don't, that seems to have kind of died quickly, which is a good thing, because I think if you have your card showing, yes, I've been vaccinated, that should be enough. But that's also going to apply to when you're bringing all your members together or stakeholders for an event. Are you going to ask people if they've been vaccinated, or is that a violation of their privacy? But I think you're right, planning that. So you might have a speaker coming from far away and their flight gets canceled. And then what happens if their COVID test expires?
Exactly.
And that's something that also has to be built in. So we really have to start thinking differently about how we're meeting, how we're traveling, and how we're communicating in the COVID era. The COVID era will end, because all eras do. But we're also seeing more and more people are able to get the vaccine, unless you're like me and live in the state of Maryland, because that's taken a really long time. But seriously, it's like we will all get it eventually.
But you do know, Cecilia, though, that the vaccine does not mean that you're COVID free. That does not mean that you cannot get COVID again. It just means that the COVID would not have as much impact that it would necessarily have had if you didn't have the vaccine.
And that's a good point too, because it's a virus. It's a virus very similar to the flu. No, it's not the flu. So please hold your cards and letters. It's not the flu. It's very similar to the flu. It's like if you get the flu shot, you can still get the flu.
That's correct.
If you get the COVID shot, you could still get COVID, because like all viruses, it's a living thing and it mutates, because that's what living things do. They evolve, they change. That's why like you can get the flu shot and still get the flu. because you got a shot for a different kind of the flu than maybe is going around that year. So all these things, there are no guarantees is what it comes down to. And
Absolutely.
the same thing with travel, like what happened to you, there was no guarantee your flight would leave on time.
Exactly.
Because there was a technical issue and they couldn't get you another plane. And I think that's another thing, that cascade effect of when a plane's not available. It used to be you could probably get another plane in a few hours, but now not necessarily, because people aren't traveling as much. So there's not as many planes in service at this time. A lot of the planes have been mothballed, as we like to say, because they're not being used. And so you don't have the access. So, because I remember one time I was coming home from a meeting and I had to change planes in Phoenix, Arizona, which is, about 4 hours from the East Coast where I live. And we had the plane, we were going down the runway when the pilot decided to cancel the flight for technical issues. And so we turned around and went back, and which was actually a good thing, because the woman sitting next to me was trying to crawl off the airplane because she wasn't comfortable with the fact he was testing the engine or something. She kind of panicked and was trying to get off the plane. It's like, well, you can't get off the plane, we're moving. But so we went back, and that was a good thing. But we had to wait for a plane to come from the East Coast out west, get service, turn around. So we had to wait at least 4 hours. And since we didn't have to stay overnight, there was no hotel, but they did feed us. They gave us, the coupons so we could go get something to eat. But you're right, you have to think about that stuff differently. You might have to provide it more often, more quickly. I know, giving shout outs to airlines, Delta Airlines is great at that. So like if you are on a flight that gets canceled, they make sure they get you over to the rebooking area as quickly as possible. And one time I had to rebook, and they had brought out, trays of sandwiches and water and soft drinks, and made sure everybody had something.
And you're right. And British Airways, like I said, they're one of the greatest airlines, and they have a very strong brand. When we eventually got to London, the team in London were exceptionally professional. They did an excellent job of making sure that we connected to our next destination. But I just think that internally they need to work with their communications team, because this is going to happen more often, particularly in COVID era. And how do we mitigate this risk? That's the question they need to be asking, not only for British Airways, but airlines across the board. And for us in the association community, we need to put planning this into our schedule. Travel, we're going to get back to normal travel. We're going to get back to our meetings. We're going to get back to our board meetings, social events. We need to start to look at how do we then work with all these elements, to make sure that not only us, but our members and our staff in the association have a very successful and peaceful and enjoyable, reasonably stress-free travel.
Right. And I think that is the goal always with travel, but especially in the COVID era, we have to be more careful about it. And I also want to say I've always enjoyed being a passenger on British Airways. I've always found it very comfortable and good service. So keep up the good work, British Airways. And I think everybody needs to work on communication, though, because if people know what's going on, they are less stressed. If you give regular updates, like making you wait 4 hours before they tell you the plane's not going to fly, that's not good communication.
Exactly. And one of the things that I like to also mention with British Airways in mind is that they need to work with their Abuja team. My recommendation would be some sort of training for the staff over there, and some sort of customer service oversight on how they deal with not only communication, but how they deal with, customers who are already frustrated, who have been there from 5 a.m. in the morning, who have children, who are exhausted, and just not being treated well. So there needs to be some sort of, customer service training, management oversight from British Airways, particularly at least in Abuja. I speak for that end because that's where we were coming from. That's where our experience was. There was negative. But again, when we got to London, the experience got better We were treated very well. The manager, one of the staff that helped us, and I give a shout out to him, Mr. Domingos, I believe that's his name. Wonderful, wonderful gentleman. And another man that I can't remember his name. They were just exceptionally helpful to us. And that's the kind of service that we want. We expect as customers when we fly, and we hope that, you know, all airlines will be able to continue to give that kind of level of service during the COVID era.
And I think as we close out this episode, this obviously is a stressful time for everyone in the world. So let's also try to keep that in mind for the people who are trying to serve us. As frustrated as we might be, they might also be frustrated. So
That's
trying
correct.
to be patient and be polite. You know, you don't have to like the people, but be polite. It's like the old saying, you catch more flies with honey
Totally
than you
agree.
do with
Totally
vinegar.
agree.
So, and I think, you know, again, we're pointing these things out today, not to be critical, but to try to make the experience better for everybody. Because
That's correct.
sometimes people don't know that a remote location for any company is not up to the standards that they would like. And so by sharing that, you're letting them know that, and then they can address it. And those people at that site might want that support and not know how to ask for it. So asking for it for them is a great thing to do too. I know I recently stayed at a cabin that's a rental cabin, and I sent them a follow-up email and said, well, we saw some things in the cabin you might want to take care of, like the potential hornet's nest that's being built under your roof. And they were back and said, oh, we so appreciate this so much. And they gave us a discount on our next stay. And I was like, wow, that's so nice, because it's not the expectation. The expectation is try to share information, which comes back to your initial point, Agnes, about the communication. Just talk to people. Because I know I was coming home from a trip to Chicago and I had an evening flight. And 20 minutes before we were supposed to start boarding, nobody had shown up from the airline. And all of a sudden, everybody's phone starts dinging. We were getting texted that the flight was canceled and that we had been rebooked for the next morning at 7 a.m. Well, no one was there to talk to. Nobody showed up. They just texted everybody. And that's really poor service.
And can you imagine in the association community, if we had an event and we canceled the event and we didn't text anybody or we didn't communicate? So, you know, this is something that, you know, that association would never be able to live it down. The reputation will be at risk, the brand will be at risk. And these are the kind of things that we like to highlight, because as the association community, one of the things that we like to do is find good benchmarks, you know, to support the industry, to help each other. And we ask for feedback. How can we do better? And that's what we're trying to address here, providing feedback and opportunity for airlines to do better, and for us in the association community to support airlines by providing adequate information and encouraging them to give us more information that we need to make our experience a very successful one as well.
And I think we can summarize, and then we do need to wrap up this episode. So I think we can summarize this as communicate, accommodate, apologize. There's really nothing wrong with apologizing. If something didn't go well, it might not be your fault, but just say, hey, I'm sorry this happened, and let me make you more comfortable. So communicate, accommodate, apologize.
That's correct.
And things go a lot smoother. So I think, you know, really thank you, Agnes, for sharing your personal experience of your trip, because I know it was a little bit dramatic near the end. It's so close to home, and yet the flight gets canceled, but now you're back, and that's what matters. So
that's right.
We want to thank British Airways for getting Agnes home, and we definitely love this airline. So we have to go, Rogue, for now, but we will be back next week with another episode, and we look forward to seeing you then. If you want to learn more about Rogue Tulips, you can visit us online at roguetulips.com. We also encourage you to check out the 501c League, which is a virtual organization for everyone in the nonprofit community and the people who love them. And the League is a leader in CAE education and preparation. So check out the League. It's 501cleague.net. Until then, we're going rogue for now. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.